Okay, welcome back. This is going to be probably a kind of a quick hitter on the subject of paint significantly. That's what brought me to these two questions. But before I get into it, let's thank Ilya for another donation. Thank you, Ilya F. Thank you, Paul. He says, in this floating world, your talks are one of the few things which I follow consistently. Yeah, I feel like I agree with you. This is a world without anchors right now. There's this major move to turn the world upside down that we're all sitting in the middle of. And um, so if he continues, for people like myself who haven't had a proper studio experience, they're a real game changer, and you're a real teacher. Thank you for saying that. I really am. When you say a real teacher, I assume that means you're getting benefit and actually improving your work based on things I say. Nothing could be more pleasing to me. Um, but yes, and I wish you all well, no matter what part of the world you're in, as the chaos that's ensuing around us. Um, I'd say you're all in my prayers. I don't know how to say that because there's way too many of you, but in the sense of you as a whole, that's a reality. I wish you all well. Benjamin C., thank you very much. That's a recurring monthly donation. That's hugely appreciated. Thank you. And Ed Van D. That's a nice to see you back in the neighborhood. I'm not even. I shouldn't assume you're in the neighborhood. I don't know where you are, but Ed worked with me here up in the town I work in for a while, and I hope he's doing. I hope you're doing well at your work and your experiences out there. Um, so let's get on with the question of the hour. There's two different points that people are making. Manuel has had several points for me, both of which are very good. And by the way, I want to say about all these, I haven't been able to look at any of your comments for about 2 weeks. So I was sat down this morning to look at them, and I was just blown away by the sheer number and a good number of very useful ones for working with videos. These two just came up first because I had time to deal with them. Some others take more time, or I can take more images to work to get the points across and that sort of thing. So this is what I had time for today. But it's just been great seeing your responses to that series on habits of highly effective impressionists. I really do hope that continues to be a benefit. Uh, I should apologize beforehand for not using more pictures. Mr. Producer caught me in that game there, and I, you know, but anyway, all right. But Emmanuel says, I want to keep things as simple as possible when painting, and I read somewhere that Sargent didn't use solvents or oil really, but mainly just the paint in itself. This, of course, might be totally wrong. And by the way, I want to say about Sargent that there are guys that are experts on Sargent out there, guys who dug into every little thing he's said and did, and they would be the guys to talk to much more than me. I'd also recommend, though, if you want to understand more about Sargent, is you get to know more about Carolus Duran. And a number of people have written things about Carolus Duran that were directly in his studio. I'm thinking Carol Beckwith and has written, and and he was a fellow student with Sargent in that studio. And who is the other one? I mentioned him just recently. Uh, Maybe it comes back to me. I'm sorry, I've forgotten it. But there are a couple different guys who talk about that, and there's a ton of information on it. How did he get such big strokes without solvents? So what I'm saying to you, by the way, is that I'm not the expert either, and I'm not here to talk about Sargent as much, but I'm going to talk about paint quality. How did he get such big strokes without solvents? Now, solvents, obviously, we're talking about things like terps or whatever else in that highly liquid form that you want to that many people, we all actually probably were raised using. I used it without discretion as a student. I didn't know the difference, and that's what he's asking too. That's what Emmanuel's asking. When I try to paint with just straight paint, it feels like glue on the canvas, and I have to really fight it. When I look at his paintings, it looks as though the paint flowed perfectly off the brush, and so he could make big, bold brushstrokes that still held together. Do you have any suggestions for getting nice, fluid brushstrokes? Yeah, as I said again, and go back. I do, but I mean, go back and have a look at the conversations by others who are, even today, are far more authorities to the extent that they understand what I understand. Also on Sargent, but When I try to paint with just straight paint, it feels like glue on the canvas. So now, first of all, solvents are solvents. We were taught that, and if you read Mayer and others, those things are primarily for breaking down paint, right? That's the very definition of a solvent, dissolver. And that's the last thing I want to put in pigments. But at the beginning, we used them all sorts of ways, trying to get that viscosity you're talking about. But I remember finally discarding solvents, terps of any kind, because I would find that they would dry in faster and very unpleasantly if I did. And that was a point at which I tried any number of things. I tried combinations of that you see with Jerome and Bougro of Stand Oil, terps, and some Damar varnish. I found that too tacky. It made it very difficult to work with the next day. And I tried bunches of variations on how much of each of those to use. And that would be one way to try to cut the drying in effects of terps. But Paxton's model was paint as simply as possible. The simplest is best was his description of the pigment, of the medium. Now, which leads us to the question of pigments coming out of tubes. Just because a pigment comes out of a tube such and such a way doesn't mean it's going to be the best for you to paint with. Whites are famously that way. There are a couple that come out of the tube almost a good viscosity to work with, but most of them come out of the tube too stiff. And everything that you mix, white gets into everything. So everything, if you have a tacky white, it's going to turn tacky. It's going to get tackier than it would have otherwise have been. You take a pigment like alizarin, it's got already a tremendously fluid quality. In fact, in some productions of it, it's very watery and unpleasantly and not good in that way when it's gotten too far that way. But I've said before, say it with clarity here, what I found the best thing to do is to mix your white to a great viscosity right from the beginning. Mix it really well. But just use the medium that's in it already. Either you can use safflower oil, but I just use I just use linseed oil. And I mix it really well because I don't want my whites to be coming up with spots that are yellower. So I mix it really well, whip it in there really well. Just thoroughly mix it in. And then get it to flow. But you'll find that when you get it too much mixed in, it's going to flow and thin out too fast. Now, at different layers, if you're painting a white area and you've already got layers of white on it, if you're finally coming to maybe some of the final marks on it, you're using a bigger wet brush and all that sort of thing, that paint can be more transparent. In other words, it can flow better because it's not. But it's not because it's not. What's the right word? It's not covering values and stuff that are much different from itself. I still don't use it that way. I just get a viscosity I like and I use it all the time. I try to get all my pigments mixed to that viscosity as I'm putting them on. And so this is the Ang question of what's the right amount of paint. Students ask him, what's the right amount of paint? He says, use this the right amount. But that's, again, the wall guy painting the wall. The right amount of paint is the amount that covers the wall quickly and smoothly and easily and without working the brush, and has great quality, has solid, and really covers. Okay. Now you're going to have to work that through, not just hear it from me. So that the most important thing I can tell you is I've already said, mix it into your whites. Whites get into everything. But then the big strokes, yeah. And so let's go to the next question, because that gets into a question that Ophelia is asking. And I don't think I've heard from either of you guys before, so I'm really delighted. I think maybe I've seen one of your names out there, but I can't say that I've heard commentary or certainly remembered it. But Ophelia says, how can all this be translated for or used in large-scale painting? Large-scale painting, okay, say slightly larger than the life-sized figure painting, or even simply life-size. How to approach a large painting with this approach? Specifically, now this is possibly should have isolated this, but specifically to do with drying times of paint and working on everything at once. Is it just as simple as having to mix large quantities of paint before putting down any notes and painting quickly? Would a large painting require a more indirect approach? Now, I know that doesn't feel like it's in quite the same category, but it has much to do with the same thing. There's nothing about painting bigger that's different from painting small. I just want you to understand that virtually nothing changes in the way you think and the methodology that you use as a Boston School type impressionist. The larger the painting, you would argue, the larger the brush, you do want to cover the canvas in a sitting if you can. On the other hand, typically, if you can do them if you can't do it in a sitting, do it in 2 sittings, and that mean and they can be consecutive days, and you probably won't lose any drying. You won't have any problems with drying. But all these things do depend on the climate you're in, and other things come to mind as well. And paint does dry differently with other mediums mixed into it. But is it just as simple to mix large quantities of paint before putting down any notes? Well, that's the question that has to do with always the size of the painting. The bigger the pile of paint you're going to have to put down there if you have a large painting. You'll learn to do that judiciously. You don't have to waste paint. But Gamel's comment to us always was if we didn't put out enough pigment to work well and to have enough to spread over the canvas and that sort of thing, he would be saying, save on shirts. He would apply his best Midwestern accent, save on shirts, or something. I apologize to you guys out there. My family's from Wisconsin, so I should have a better accent. But is it simple? Yeah. So in one sense, it's use large amounts of paint, only have them sitting there on your palette. But you don't have to pre-mix anything. You don't want to pre-mix this stuff. You want to mix it, be ready to mix it there. But you're going to have to learn efficiencies. You're going to have to learn to mix to the amount you need, but not too much. And you have to learn to test notes and all that sort of stuff. So you know beforehand when you're mixing what kind of notes you're ultimately mixing toward. And painting quickly is never really an option. You want to get around, but you don't want to get around so quickly that you lose your mind. You lose you're not all there. Right. So you can only paint as fast as you can manage the information. So getting around faster isn't really the thing. So, but I still wouldn't recommend anything like an underpainting or anything like that. If you got a painting started and your darks, so the only thing you can lose by having a painting dry is especially if you're painting with like us on a white canvas, the only thing you're going to lose is a chance to move the darks over with a rag, get them out of the way. So at the end of any day, if you find that you're not going to be able to get back to the painting, then you'll want to either move those darks out of there, clean those areas up as light as you can get them, so that the darks are way in safe places. Or just better, just don't put them in unsafe places. As you're going around hitting notes, just be thinking to put those darks right in the middle of the area they land in, not at the edge where the drawing is going to be, because that's undoubtedly going to have to move. So, but don't use a more indirect approach. Paint our way. You can do it. So I'm going to show you these pictures that have to do with you guys' discussion points here. So the one is about the viscosity of paint. I'll look at Sargent's, and then the other ones are going to be about just painting a large picture. I'll show you my still life that I've shown you before, the big one. So here's Sargent doing what you're describing, and he uses a very good viscosity. He seems to always have enough paint in his brush, and he seems to be able to cover well and move it beautifully. What we know about Sargent, what I've read about Sargent, is that he mixed his own paint. Like I said, our whites. I don't know about whether it was more than the whites or it was everything, but I know that he mixed his paints. He created his own base. Now, I've seen references to stand oil, but stand oil comes in so many viscosities that who knows what that means. And but he obviously doesn't have a paint that's sticky or is going to clump up on you. Forget what your word was. So, so pre-mixing, again, we're back to that, pre-setting your own paints. And if you pre-mix a whole bunch of paint that you're going to use for that day, that's one thing. That's what I do. And then if you pre-mix, I'm talking about whites now. But you can also pre-mix in tube paint. So I don't know anything about more than that about what he did. But there's no question he's using a liquid paint that covers well. And the only reference I have is to stand oil. You will have to experiment. The attraction to big strokes, I understand. On the other hand, it's it's great for certain kinds of dresses and things like this one. And it isn't as great for certain other things. Or you'll wind up with everything looking wet and fluid when it's actually textury and things like that. So, and by the way, a second thing I should say to you is that Sargent's work by the planes enables that also. For you to have a bigger brush. For those of us like myself who are more organized around the Ang approach, which is by the round, rather than by the plane, there are other issues, and so on. I don't know what else to say about that, you guys. Who knows if this is even helpful to you. I show this one because there's a start out there somewhere, I believe, of some of these heads in which you can see him using much littler brushes. And of course, this thing is a textury grass, spot, lots of stuff like that. And so big fat brushes aren't always going to be the thing. So I want to just say that there's a way, like for the dress of the back girl in the back, that you could have actually laid this in with marks that were considerably less smooth and fluid, and then moved yourself to more fluid, and made this marks more fluid in the next iteration of it, the next skin. So let me show you this one by Tarbell, where it does look like he used a considerably smaller brush than you find Sargent using over there. And yet you can see him getting to a kind of, and again, that's in the eye of the beholder, but a kind of fluidity, plenty of fluidity to make the dress maintain its texture and all that sort of thing. Some of these things are easier to understand when you can actually see the dress the painter's painting right in front of you, and then you can see the marks, because it's considerably more difficult to interpret. If one dress can be a whole lot more gossamer and fluid, and the other one can be more textury, and they would naturally lead to slightly different treatments. To the degree that you respect things like texture and aren't just painting everything in a stylistic way. And that's one of those things that Sargent has sometimes working against him, in my view, that there's an element of style that dominates. And I'm not a fan of that. I'm more like Boston School in the sense that I prefer not to have the look of nature dominated by a stylistic unity, but rather by the unity of nature that encompasses all the elements. On the other hand, I don't think Sargent is I don't consider that a grand flaw. I just am pointing out. I'm just pointing it out to you, so don't quote me as picking on Sargent. In any case, I'm just saying Tarbell is using smaller brushes and still getting to the point of having a more fluid. This is still an early on phase of a painting by the look of it. More fluid marks, more fluid handling. Paint moves well. A brush doesn't have to be 2 miles wide for you to get paint to smooth to move in a way that just looks fluid and seamless. But all brushes have edges and limits, as it were. So, all right. Now, so let's go back though for a second to this is a Joseph de Camp, and it's harder to see here, but that great sense of the fluidity of the object of the drapery. On closer look, you may find that there's more complexity to that than you otherwise thought. So I'm not saying one way or the other how to treat this, but I think the Boston School guys had a slightly greater adherence, not having been trained in a tonalist sort of model. They had greater adherence to the movement of color that sort of, I wouldn't say it requires little marks and that sort of thing, but it does. But there's something about that the big fat brush may not be your great friend with. We were told never to blend, and so you understand, just brushing two marks into each other. Tarbell's comment about that, and I believe that may show up in the 24 sittings with Edmund Tarbell. But he's telling people to just put down a note and leave it, put down a note and leave it, and don't slur and not to be slurring two notes together. I do believe that's Warren's interpretation from from his essay on Tarbell. Ask me for that if you don't have it. 24 sittings with Edmund Tarbell. I'll send it to you. Okay. So I'm only showing you my still life because it's a big picture. By the way, I got to do this. I don't know how big this picture is, but it's life size. So my guess is it's no less than 5 feet tall, right? This one is something less than that, but not by a lot, from my understanding, my memory of it. And this one is probably 40 some inches tall. Probably it's probably a life size figure. And 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 this one is 48 inches tall. And why am I saying this? Because somebody asked me online. They said they can't quite understand this because they don't understand how big the painting is. That's one of the reasons I was saying the treatment doesn't change much. On the other hand, when you're painting a large, if you can't tell that, you have no idea what brush size is being used and that sort of thing. I'm not saying I don't find that to be the compelling thing. The general impression may require different things, much more than the size of the painting, the painting as a total mass. But nevertheless, I thought it was an interesting idea to suggest the sizes of these pictures. I'll try to do it more often and see where that takes us. Now you can see in this painting here, there's a lot of different kinds of treatments, but in certain passages like down here, I'm handling paint rather what you'd say like Sargent. And other places, less so. I'm not looking for fluidity. There's a lot of broken stuff here. And like here, I could have run this big slick curve on these things here, but they weren't doing that. They were like hand painted on or whatever. They weren't painted. This is one of those, I don't know what they are called, but you find goldfish in them in Thailand, if not China. But the marks that are made on this one are of a variety, depending on for example, porcelain has a different quality than a rug. So I use different kinds of marks for different things. I'm just mentioning it for you. But this is just to talk to Ophelia about the lay-in. This is a large painting, and I laid it in the way I do for every other kind of a painting. I would have been trying to nail certain aspects of the light effect here and the placement of this thing. I'd try to get that well in hand early on. I'd be getting landmarks. This doesn't quite show, but the piece of the rug is sitting here. Certain other landmarks in the painting to set up the composition. I'd be getting a lot of the major movement of this thing in there, and certain bits of the drawing, trying to establish placement. This was set up early. But in the meantime, the great masses of values are not doing very little particular things, so you can move through them pretty well. But you have to make sure they're right in their values to other things and their colors to other things. So, but this one, I will tell you, this took me 2 sittings to cover. And of course, that's the reason 48 by 46, I think is what it is, or some such. But don't feel like you have to desert the field, switch games. But I'll just, by closing this, I'm just going to say, but viscosity of paint really does help. Over 2 days with drying time shouldn't be a factor, to repeat myself. And so I hope that's helpful. I feel like I'm just in the middle of coming off of that series, where I didn't have to think. I'm in the middle of trying to find your quote, your questions and stuff. And I don't want to do anybody a disservice by not saying enough here, but I figured I'd be here for 10 minutes, and what have I been here for? Almost a half hour. So, all right. Any more questions on this discussion? There are other videos out there, are welcome, but there are other videos out there on the same subject of something to do with paint quality. So I'm just calling this one paint quality, if I remember right, and I hope that's helpful. So thank you very much again. Thank you for your donations, Ilya, Ed, and I better go look back because I want to not say your name. Benjamin, Benjamin C. Thank you again, and thank you all for all your comments, all your very, very nice comments that I haven't looked at for 2 weeks. I've now answered a bunch of them, but I got a bunch more to go. I think I might have covered half the territory. I try to keep up, and now I can see why I must, especially as the numbers increase, the number of people responding. I love to hear from you. I want to be able to build these videos in a way that is useful to you. So it doesn't matter what age in development you are, what stage of development you are, just send the questions, send the discussion points. What do they call them? Mentions, comments, all the rest. Okay. Thank you. See you in the next one.